Good morning, everyone. My name's Kevin, and I work at Shipsted in Oslo. And I'm here today to talk about some of the things, at least I find really interesting about what we're doing with data at the moment. I am the manager of a team, a data engineering team in Oslo we call Insights Engineering. You can probably tell by the accent I'm not Norwegian, but I've been there for a very long time. I am actually American, and these days I feel like when I say that I should follow it with, sorry about Trump. So, for people who are not Swedish or Norwegian, a little bit about Schibsted. We're a company of about 8,000 people or so, headquartered in Oslo. And the company's roughly split in half between a media business and a marketplaces business. Marketplaces is operating in 20 some odd countries. It's running online classified sites in Europe, in North Africa, South America, all over. And in media, we're talking about news rooms, news sites. Here in Sweden, like Aftonbladet and Svenska Dagbladet, and in Norway, Aftenposten, VG, and a bunch of others. And I'm here representing the media side of the business. A little bit about what we do in media before we get into data. We think that journalism and news is a really, really important part of any well-functioning democracy. And we think our job in that function is to make sure people close the gap between what they know and what they need to know to be a valuable member of society. And we don't take ourselves very seriously, but we do take that mission extremely seriously. We think it's really important. And we think in order to sustain that mission and sustain the business, data plays a really important part in that. I'm going to say we a lot in this presentation. I've actually only been in this current function for a very short amount of time, and a lot of the work I will sound like I'm taking credit for is actually done by some very hardworking teams in Oslo and in Stockholm. But I'll make it sound like I did everything. We take in about 700 million or so user events every day. Behavioral tracking data, and that's done by our data platform team in Oslo. They're running tracking scripts on all of Schibsted's sites and apps, gathering all this data and it's storing it in AWS in S3. We're a primarily Amazon shop, so we're using things you probably know like Kinesis and S3 and Kafka and a whole bunch of other things. And we call this data collection platform Pulse. It's been a big engineering effort for Shipsted to do this. Like it's a history of a bunch of sites running completely independently from one another, and now we're trying to bring it all together onto a common platform, and that's expensive. That takes a lot of work, but it also has yielded a lot of benefits for Shipsted. One of the areas that's been the most benefited from consolidating all of our data together has been in the advertising space. We're able to take all this data that we gather, build models of our users, generate ad segments from that, and work with our partner AppNexus to deliver really valuable ads business for our sites. And there's been some other areas that have been really successful as well. So for example, personalizing both marketplaces and news sites based on users' preferences and these kinds of things has worked out really well. And if you're in the if you're in the marketplaces business, you're in the fraud business whether you like it or not. People use them for all sorts of nefarious things, stealing cars and selling God knows what. So you need to be able to detect those things, and having all this data together in a consolidated platform where we can share our approaches across all of our 20 some odd classified sites has been really successful. But to get access to this data and to use this data in a meaningful way, you need a certain skill set. And that skill set is the skill set data scientists and data engineers typically possess. We're talking about getting stuff out of S3. Everything is stored in Parquet formats. They're running Spark jobs. They're using Luigi, which is built by Spotify around the corner, for driving the different flows that our data scientists use. And they're able to deliver those results that we saw on the previous page. And it works. Unfortunately, not everyone is a data scientist. It's just a fact. There are far too few of them in the world. Probably shouldn't say that too often because they already have pretty big egos, so we don't want to make it worse, but there are just not enough of them to go around. So people need data to do their jobs in Shipsted and in every other company. Whether you're an engineer, a journalist, a product manager, whatever it is, you need the data you need in order to make the decisions you need to make. And if this centralized data platform that we're building requires a very deep skill set around data science to be able to use it, that's simply not going to be good enough for everyone in the company. So what happens is what you see on the screen now. People go out in the different sites in Shipsted and they buy all sorts of third-party tools to fill the gaps, the things we can't offer the people. I have nothing against any of these companies. These are all great companies. Well, I actually don't like a couple of them, but mostly these are all great companies. And they're building great products. And they do serve the needs of the individual sites. So sites going out and picking these tools and using them is not inherently a problem. The problem is what happens when you put all of those together and have to manage that across an entire group like Shipsted. You end up with many, many tools, many, many different sites using different tools. That leads to a lot of complexity. Sites spend a lot of time managing integrations with these tools, and sometimes they're building these tools themselves, which costs even more, takes even more time. Many of these tools have their own trackers and their own data, and that leads to siloing of the data, where basically we're paying for this tool is gathering a bunch of data, and we can't really get at it in the ways we want, which means we can't correlate data between these tools. It also leads to weird trust situations where two different tools report two different numbers, and all of a sudden our users stop trusting either of them. So that's a big problem. Cost is an obvious problem here. We're buying a whole bunch of different tools. Sometimes they do the exact same thing. We're not getting any economies of scale on these deals. And of course, we're spending a bunch of money and a bunch of engineering time building our own data platform, and we're not really getting a return on that investment if we're needing to also battle all these other tools. And last and certainly not least, with GDPR being in the front of everyone's minds these days, ensuring compliance across all these different tools is really hard. It's a lot of work. So what are we going to do about it? Or what are we doing about it? We have this idea that we should democratize access to this data. We should make this data available to the right people in the right way, regardless of what their role is inside of Shipsted. And we should do that in a way that always takes care of security and always takes care of privacy as we're doing it. Sounds nice. What's it mean in practice? As the previous speaker mentioned, there's the garbage in, garbage out saying, which is totally true. So the first thing we need to do is make sure the data quality is where it needs to be. We've had for a very long time in our data platform the ability to validate the events that are coming in. Do they meet some schema, for example? But we found this is, sites will still find a way to interpret things differently, even if the schema are all correct. So they'll have different ideas of what events mean, what properties mean, and we'll get really bad data, even if we pass schema validation and that sort of thing. So we think there's really a human factor here. And what that means is we're working really hard with all of the leads, analytics leads, engineering leads, to build a standard across Shipsted for what these events actually mean, especially for the most core important events we have, like viewing news sites, clicking on titles, reading articles. All these things need to be really well standardized, and the data needs to be really high quality. We're also doing a lot of work in doing analysis of the events as they come in to make sure that quality is met, basically. But the most important thing is actually providing this data to people. And what that means is if you think of all these events we've gathered up in the kind of core of our system, we want to take that center core and we want to push it out to the edges of the company, to every person in every role, and make sure they're getting the data they need. What that means in practice is basically building and buying the right technological pieces that close those gaps, that check as many boxes as we can for the different teams in the company, and give them the data they need. As a result, we'll have fewer and fewer tools and more centrally managed systems. That's really important. The teams, as I said before, spend a lot of time managing all these complex systems, and most of them are the same problems across all of our sites in Shipsted. We don't really want people spending time doing those things. We want them thinking about what makes their brand unique. Like Svenska Dagbladet and Aftonbladet are two very different companies, but they have a lot of the same problems. So we want the standard problems to be solved once, and we want the unique problems to be solved by each company on its own, delivering real value to customers. And I'll sound like a broken record, but again, security and privacy, think about those all the time. I'm going to take you through a handful of use cases that kind of show what sort of things we're doing. But before I do that, it's good to get like a really architecture-y view of our data platform, what we're talking about here. We basically have two sides. Every event that comes into Shipsted goes through both a batch and a stream side of our data platform. On the batch side, we're doing traditional batch things. We're mostly using, we're storing everything in S3, and we're mostly using Spark there to do a lot of our work. And we have a bunch of other ETL tools, talking to data warehouses and those kind of things. And then we have the streaming side, which is based on Kafka, which is more for systems that need to get events in a very timely fashion. We call it real time, but we don't mean really real time, but sort of within a second or something. So the first use case, starting at the very bottom, the people who are closest to the data and closest to the tech, our engineers and our data scientists. And looking at the streaming side of things. We have all these kind of events that come in when someone uses a news site. They view the front page, they scroll down, they see an article they want to read, click on it, read the article or don't, go back, et cetera, click on recommended articles, whatever it is. All those events come in and they go to Kafka. And in Kafka, we can use Kafka streams to generate some real-time streaming analytics from that data. The one we started with is something we call clicks per impression or view-through rates. Basically means every time an article is shown on a front page of a news site, count it. And every time someone clicks it, count that too. And do that regardless of where the article appears on the front page. And basically figure out what are the most popular articles in general and at any position on the front page. Okay, so we build that metric with the Kafka Streams application. It works. Now we need to consume it in some way. The first place we chose to consume that, and the first place we're using it, is in basically laying out the front page of the newspapers. Historically, an editor picks each and every story, places it on the news site, moves them around, and does everything manually. More and more, our ML team, our machine learning team in Oslo and Sweden, is doing things more algorithmically, basically helping pick the articles and where they should go on the page. So they take that clicks per impression metrics and they use it to decide where stories should go on the front pages of newspapers. Once we've built that whole pipeline, when we can take in the events, we can run streaming analytics on it, and we can consume it into some application, we can scale this. It's a real kind of nailing and scaling thing for us. We can scale in terms of the number of metrics. We can keep adding new things. This clicks per impression is nice. We can calculate engagement scores and other metrics on these events. And we can scale in terms of the consumption of these things. We can use the same data for lots of different applications. We're already doing things around recommending articles. If you're reading one article, you may also like this. Same thing with videos. And also things around propensity scores and things that will improve our paywall and our subscription business. So this works really great for engineers and data scientists. We can give them nice APIs to get the metrics they need in a really timely fashion. That's cool. It's going really well. We actually won an award. Schibsted did or Aftenposten specifically, won an award in Washington, D.C. a few months back for this algorithmic front page and how effective it has been from the International News Media Association. So very proud of that one. Right, so that was good for engineers and data scientists. So let's move up the stack a bit and go to the analysts, who are kind of our next most technical consumers of data in the company. And we're really excited about this piece because we're working on it very hard right now. But basically, we have chosen Snowflake as our one and only central data warehouse for Schibsted Media. What does that mean? So basically, today, every one of the news sites has some sort of data warehousing solution. Some of them are relatively modern commercial products, but most of them are pretty out of date, held together with lots of tape and twine. And people are spending a lot of time maintaining these things. It's a real struggle. So what we want to do is, since we have all this data centralized, let's take all of that data and put it into a centralized data warehouse. We chose Snowflake because, as I said before, we're an AWS shop. All of our data lives in Amazon. And Snowflake kind of is a cloud-native data warehouse, so it plays really nice with our setup. All of our data lives in S3 in Parquet format, and Snowflake can just drink it up from there automatically as the files are written into S3. They can be loaded into Snowflake. And Snowflake understands Parquet natively, so our developers don't have to do any weird transforms or anything. So that's great. We also load in a bunch of other data, like user profile data and subscriptions, where we're running some traditional ETL jobs based on Airflow from Airbnb, dumping that into S3 and letting Snowflake load that as well. This is great. The other thing we really are happy with is the way Snowflake scales is it treats your storage scaling and your compute scaling independently of one another. We have a pretty good idea how much data we have and how much it's going to grow by in the coming months and years. News sites don't change that much. What we don't know is how much this thing is going to be used. We know we're going to run a bunch of reports and a bunch of dashboards with Tableau, but that's all we know. We don't know if analysts will be in there 24/7 crunching huge jobs, or if it will mostly be those other tasks. So the nice thing with Snowflake is we can scale as we need to with those things. That we can bring up a compute cluster that's big enough for our Tableau needs, for example. And if someone needs to run some gigantic reports, they can bring up another compute cluster to do that work. And all the data just stays there in S3 happily the whole time. One thing this unlocks for us that we've actually never had in Shipsted, it's kind of embarrassing, but we've not really been able to run reports across the entire company to say how many subscribers do we have across Aftenposten, Federlandsvenner, Bergens Tidende, all of our newspapers. Now we can. It'll all be in one place and it will all work. And this is going to be kind of the source of truth when it comes to reports. I spoke to one of our head of analytics yesterday, actually, and he's very excited about having a data warehouse that he doesn't have to run. And he kind of said, a few months from now, if someone shows him a report that's not generated via this Snowflake and this Snowflake setup, he won't trust it. It's not the truth. So we kind of want one place where the truth lives. And this is exciting because we're going live with this in the next couple of weeks. So it's exciting times for us in the data warehousing space. Going up the stack one level higher to our UX people and our PMs. These people want traditional analytics. They want to know what are users doing on our sites. For that, we use Amplitude. We could have dropped Amplitude's tracking script into all of our sites and let Amplitude do its thing. That would have worked, but that would have really been a lot of work for us, and it would have locked us into Amplitude quite tightly. So we're much happier with the setup we have now, which is all of our data comes into the data platform like every other event we have. We transform those, we filter them out to drop privacy-sensitive information. We enhance it with some other data, like we add information about articles or information about users, and then we pipe that onto Amplitude through their backend API. For us, this works really great. We still have full ownership of our own data. We feel like we're in control. We know that we have the privacy aspects under control. And we still get all the benefits of Amplitude, with the added benefit of we can switch Amplitude anytime we want. We can switch to Mixpanel tomorrow, and it would be a little bit of work, but not really very much. So just changing a few transforms and a few syncs in our Kafka setup. So that's really working well, and now our PMs and our UX people can do the things they want to do, like build funnels of what are our users doing when they sign up for a site, or how many people are clicking on a certain offer, or anything like that. The kind of normal PM UX stuff. And last but not least, kind of at the highest level of our user stack, I would say, the people who are the farthest away from the tech, farthest away from the data, are the people in the newsrooms themselves, the journalists, the editors. They have pretty demanding needs of data as well, but they're obviously not data scientists or engineers. So we have to get them the data in a way that's friendly for them to consume as well. It looks a lot like our Amplitude setup. Data comes in, data gets transformed, data gets filtered, and then it gets loaded into some dashboards that we build internally. So these are things that will tell an editor how well is a story performing today in a certain spot. If they change the title, they can see quite quickly how much better does it perform now, or worse. For a journalist, they can see who's clicking on their, like how many people are viewing their stories, how long are they staying, are they scrolling through the articles or not. So it gives them really valuable information that helps them optimize what they're doing. So at every level here, we start to have the users, regardless of their role, taken care of. Doesn't come without its costs. When you start spreading data into all these systems, you start spreading security and privacy problems into all these systems. For security, there's no silver bullet. It's not rocket science. You just need to take really good care of user roles and access control everywhere that you're spreading the data. For us right now, that's mostly a manual job. We're relatively small number of places data lives and a relatively small number of users. So for now, we're basically, our central insights team is managing these things across all these systems. We don't think it's going to fly forever. We know we're going to have to do some things differently in the future, probably manage all this with a central system that synchronizes to all these different systems. But for now, you know, our lead spending a few minutes every day managing these things is not a huge burden. But it's super important. A much bigger burden and equally important is privacy. We don't roll out anything that's not GDPR compliant. That's sort of rule 0 now. So you know, nothing goes out and nothing lets anyone, we don't let anyone access anything until we have GDPR compliance there. This is for users who are logged in to our sites and also anonymous users. We don't treat them any differently in terms of you know, personal data is personal data to us. We centrally manage all of our consents for cases where we need user consent for things, and we also centrally manage the cases where users can opt out of legitimate interest cases, basically. Right now, that's true of both logged in and not logged in users. We're now looking to change that to a system where the events themselves actually carry whether or not the user has consented to this event being used for different purposes. And that scales much better, especially in the cases of anonymous users, because people open one of our news sites in a private browsing window will never see that anonymous user again. So sticking its consent in a database and storing it forever is not very smart. But it did get us through May 25th. So we'll keep it for a little while, but we're trying to make it smarter now. And lastly, in terms of privacy, and probably most complex, is when you spread data to all these systems and a user comes along and says, delete me, or please give me all of my data. This gets really complicated. Luckily, we have a brilliant team in Oslo working on privacy issues, and they built a system for us that solves this quite elegantly, I think. If you visit our account page, and our account page is for logging into any Shipsted site, you can ask to be deleted or ask to have your data. That sends a signal to what we call the privacy broker, and that system then sends signals onwards to every single system in the Shipsted ecosystem. Any system it wants can register for these notifications. When it gets one of these signals, it has to acknowledge that it got it back to the privacy broker, and it has to do whatever the signal was, either take out the user's data and give it back to the privacy broker, or delete the user. Once it has done that, it informs the privacy broker that that job is done. And it even works for third-party systems. We build these delegates or proxies so that basically when an event comes in and says, please delete from Amplitude, for example, we go and call Amplitude's APIs for those deletions, and then we acknowledge back to the privacy broker, yep, we deleted everything, it's fine. If any system fails to do its parts and uphold its duty, we get alerted, so either by email or pager duty, that, hey, a user has asked for a takeout and it's not working. And there's also kind of provisions for systems where we have to do things manually. So this is working great. We've processed tens of thousands of privacy requests since May 25th, and it's working really, really well. Cool. Wrapping all this together, we really think the work we're doing now is important, and it's going to pay off for Shipsted in the long run. We're ensuring that all the data we collect is of high quality, that it's standardized across all of our systems. And we're ensuring that the right people have access to that data via the right mechanisms, whether that's Snowflake, Amplitude, different APIs, whatever it is. We think this is going to, one, enable people to have a lot more free time in our sites, because right now they spend too much time doing redundant work that other people are doing in other sites as well. It's going to free up all that time where they can think about what makes their site special and what value can they bring to their users. And it's also just going to make sure people have the right data at the right time to make data-informed decisions. And not to sound cliche, but that leads to lower risk. It lets people move faster. It lets people innovate and experiment. And we think it's definitely going to pay off for Shipsted in the long run. That's all I've got. Would love to hear from anyone in a similar situation going through similar things, because I think it's really important to share the experiences on these things. So Kevin at Shipsted.com if anyone wants to talk. But otherwise, that's it from me.